Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. It certainly was not just the officers or the platoon leaders or even the squad leaders who fought for our freedoms in World War II. Private First Class Dick Davison of Bryan was a pure soldier in Europe, a rifle fighter on the ground. He continues his story of proud service today and will tell you also a sobering account of the atrocity known as Operation Keel. Dick Davison, a pleasure to have you back for a second week.
Tom.
You have a story that could not be told in 30 minutes. So we're gonna go with more. We're gonna talk about Operation Keel towards the end of the show, but I want to sort of continue where we left off last week. But for those who want to be introduced to you, you were a young man, went to VMI, you 18 years old, and a little while later you went on overseas. Sort of take us from there to sort of where we left off last week. You were a man that was in an awful lot of battles and were very fortunate.
Yeah, I told last time about how I went overseas with the 70th Division, but because of a little confrontation I had with the sergeant, I wound up in the 80th Division,
Right.
which is where I actually fought. And when we stopped last time, we were in the middle of a hard fight for the little town of Borscheid in Luxembourg.
Right.
Turns out that before that we took that town, we'd lost about 20 men out of the company. I described earlier how my platoon had nearly been wiped out in this minefield. We had 2 more killed taking Borscheid, so we were down probably no more than 10 men.
Right.
Give you an idea, I called my account not Band of Brothers but Band of Strangers, because in December when I joined them there were only 5 men. Now we're down to about 10 men.
And it
where
was
full strength is 40.
And it was very difficult to get close to these people, not because you didn't want to, but because the next day they might be gone.
And they weren't. They were, exactly. I'd already lost 1 foxhole buddy. Well, after a little bit more time, we wound up on the banks of the Sour River. And I had some stories there, but I don't have time to tell all of them. I want to get to the main one,
Yes, sir.
which is the crossing of the river. But it turns out there that this is the boundary between Germany and Luxembourg. And on the other side of the river is the infamous Siegfried Line. Now, since we'd lost so many men, we were filled up again with replacements.
Yes, sir.
Built right back up to full strength. We got a brand new second lieutenant because our second lieutenant had been killed.
Right.
And we got, I still had my squad leader.
Right.
Had become platoon sergeant. No, that was later.
Right.
Anyway, we were built up to full strength for the crossing of the river. Now, the interesting thing was the plan to cross the river. The river had a rather steep bank and it was rather swift. But there was a little road that ran alongside the river about 100 feet from the river. And there was some woods between the river and the road. So the idea was at night we carry boats down and put them on that road until we have enough boats to get everybody in the company across. Then under the cover of a heavy artillery bombardment, we run down, we grab our boats. The Germans, of course, can't hear us or see us either one because it's night. We grab our boats, we run down to the river, we row across, and when we have enough men across, we storm the hill and take it. This is the plan. Well, on the night of, actually the early morning of February the 7th, 1945, we started this operation. It was a black night. And you heard curses as men fell down precipices and stumbled and got muddy all the way down. And before we actually got down there, it turns out that it was at 2 o'clock in the morning, the artillery opened up. And I want to mention that because I've never seen anything like it. This was a major offense, and we were attacking a difficult position. So they had lined up 12 battalions of artillery behind, I believe, 2 battalions of infantry. And when they opened up, it was what they used to call drum fire. I mean, it was just bum, 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 never stopping. And the ground heaved and the lights flashed, and this went on and on and on. But we worked our way down to the river, as we were supposed to, and after about 30 minutes, the fire slowed down some. After all, we were supposed to be across not long after this.
Right.
So we grabbed the boats just like we're supposed to. We start to the river, and guess what? Those little trees, they're only about this big, but too big to break, were so close together, we couldn't get our boats to the river. And it turns out that E Company that was crossing alongside of us had an equal problem. They had an embankment so high that they couldn't get their boats to the river. Poor old F Company got across all by themselves and promptly got pinned down. They got all the German fire, and they went nowhere. Well, we tried to get our boats to the river until daylight came. And as soon as daylight came, boy, the Germans opened up on us. Shells came screaming in. There was nothing to do but run. We were going to be wiped out otherwise because we couldn't get to them. But they could darn sure shell us because they were on the hill and they could see us. We were close. So I ran up the hill till I found a place to hide. It was a bunch of rocks that I hid in. Some of the guys kept running and we didn't see for another day or two. But I hid among those rocks along with 4 or 5 other guys, and I just sat there. Probably ate my lunch while I was there. Didn't have anything else to do. Anyway, a non-commissioned officer came down finally and told us to work our way down to where F Company was. Now, we were being shelled, but the shells were coming in sporadically enough that you could between shells, you could work your way down to where F Company had crossed. And so I did that. I went about halfway down the hill, and I dug a shallow foxhole and climbed in the foxhole. And somewhere during that afternoon, they started trying to cross at F Company's position. But remember now, they do have cover. There's a house down there, a stone house, and they have a few boats behind it, so they have a modicum of cover. But it's daylight now, and the Germans are only about 100 yards away, and on top of that, they can't get but about 1 boat at a time down there. Well, I don't know how many they tried, because I was up the hill a little bit, and I couldn't see it all, but nobody got across. I finally worked my way down to that house, and when I did, some poor joker had jumped overboard. As the German machine gun fire comes in, the smart ones just bailed out and swam out. Well, the lieutenant was trying to convince him to try again, and he, in no unspoken terms, told him, that was it, I'm not going to do it. And I think at that point they decided they better wait until dark. That was the smartest thing they'd done all day.
Right.
So we waited till dark, and I was in one of the first boats to get across. And poor old F Company, it turns out that the river was kind of, the hill was kind of like this, and the river was over here. And that hill gave you a little bit of cover. There was a little spot there where you could have some cover. And you know, it came down and right here against it. So we worked our way down, and we'd dig a hole, and the next guy would dig a hole, and we just worked our way down from F Company, extending the line. Turned out when morning came, the next morning, there was a boat right out there in the river with a dead GI, and it just hunched over like that. I have no idea how that boat got there or how he was killed. Maybe he was one of the boats that actually made it across.
Right.
But I was told that nobody made it across. Or maybe it was an accidental hit during the night or a lucky hit. Or maybe it was one of the initial F Company guys. I don't know. But the next day, they finally woke up and started smoking the hill. All my life, I've thought, every time I see those pictures of those poor devils landing on Iwo Jima or D-Day, I think, wow, aren't they throwing smoke on them? Because with smoke, we could see and they couldn't. Right. And so we continued to get men across until just about everybody that hadn't run away, some had run away, was across. But then a terrible thing happened. Just as this boat landed, right behind my position, I mean, a little bit farther, but maybe 10 yards behind where I was sitting, the smoke cleared. There was a break. Maybe they ran out of shells for a minute. Well, the guys bailed out of the boat, and all of them made it but the last guy. And just as he started out, the German machine gun opened up. Well, he missed him, but instead of just charging on to safety, he hit the ground. And then the most terrible thing happened. That German machine gun opened up, and I know in the movies you've watched machine guns make little spouts as they crawl across the ground.
Right.
Well, that machine gunner just drew a line right over his body. And I sat there just looking at him just like that, and I said, he's dead. Would you believe that guy, when that burst was over, that guy got up and dashed to safety, didn't have a scratch on him, but he fell down just sobbing hysterically. I mean, he was absolutely, he knew that it was just by the grace of God that his bullet-riddled corpse wasn't lying out there in that little piece of ground.
It's interesting because you told me that there probably would have been more lives lost in the war had the people who were shooting the guns been a little bit more skilled at shooting the guns. A lot of the gunfire was just sort of helter-skelter.
But this guy was firing from safety up there. He probably was in a well-concealed position, see, and he was just sitting up there taking target practice, and he was dead on. His bullets just crawled right across that guy's body. How he missed him, I do not know. It was just one of those things. Well, we finally got enough men across that we did assault the position. And it went well, because we just stormed the position, and when we reached the top, the Germans had run. There were a lot of woods, and I saw one dead German, and that was all. But the woods closed down your visibility to a few feet. Yes. Well, we spun around and headed down this, the parallel to the river to clean the Germans off. And I had an automatic rifle at the time, Browning automatic rifle, which fired 20 bullets, full automatic. And I put myself up at the far end, which was the most dangerous spot. But I really thought they'd want my firepower up there. But the lieutenant came up and told me to move down the line. Well, as I told you, I want to know why. And so I argued with him, and so I got a few curse words, and I obeyed. I did obey orders after I was properly cursed. So I went down the line. Well, we started forward, and I don't know how far we went, but all of a sudden we hit fire. I mean, there was obviously we'd run into the Germans. And I opened up and was raking the front of me with my gun and advancing, and I suddenly realized I was not getting any fire. So I just moved forward by myself. I was on my own now, and I just moved forward, and I came to the edge of the woods. And I looked, and no farther than, probably 10 yards away, there was a big stone, maybe a couple of big stones there. And so I crawled on my stomach up to get behind those stones. Nobody even knew I'd done it. It turns out that my life wasn't worth a plug nickel. I was actually crawling in plain view of the Germans, who were no more than 20 yards away. But most of our fire was farther up the hill, and they were looking up the hill and not looking down where I was. And so when I crawled on my stomach, they didn't see me. Now, I could have dashed and made it, but then they would have known I was there. Now, because I crawled, they didn't know I was there. Well, I looked around this rock, and all of a sudden I saw the smoke from a gun from behind some bushes. There was a lot of bushes, wooded. And I looked very carefully, and I saw a human head. So I just propped up like this. I put his head right on my front sight and said to myself, I'm about to kill a man, and I pulled the trigger. Well, down he went, needless to say. And then I just raked the German position, and I screamed to the other guys where they were. And another guy crawled up beside me, and we both were raking that position. And then at that point, I got what was almost like a wound, in that I lost a big part of my hearing in my right ear for the rest of my life.
Right.
This guy had crawled up right beside me, and I had emptied my automatic rifle. And I was in the process of reloading when 3 Germans jumped up and made a break for it. This guy throws up his rifle with the muzzle about that far from my ear and goes bam, bam, bam.
Oh my.
Good golly. I was stoned there for a while, and guess what? He missed all 3 times, and several other people fired. You talk about saving lives. Those 3 Germans got away, and they were not over 20, 25 yards away.
And you lost part of your hearing.
And I lost part of my hearing. I was the only casualty, it turned out. But anyway, we kept firing at the German position, and the rest of them surrendered. So we did achieve that. We eliminated the German position without any more losses. I've always said that this was probably my finest moment on the front.
Right.
I think I've seen guys get Bronze Stars for less, but that's okay. We were too busy fighting to think about, we were too busy staying alive to think about boring things like that at the time.
We mentioned last week, and we alluded to it now, that you came away from your service, fortunately, without a Purple Heart.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to earn one of those.
Right.
But without the significant awards that you hear about, like the Bronze Star Medal and things like that, does that bother you?
No, not really. Oh, I would have liked to have gotten it. I have that much ego. But you do get a little cynical, because guys like, outfits like I was in will see more danger in a day than some other units see in a month.
Right.
And yet you'd be surprised how many guys in headquarters company and how many officers actually do have medals. Yes. And so you know that it's not being equitably distributed. And part of it, though, really is simply that what is very heroic for somebody in headquarters company is day's work in a rifle company. That's the thing.
Indeed. Last week we talked about the Battle of the Bulge and the weather and the cold, and it was this cold and the brutal attack that your feet took because of the cold that eventually ended your military career. Talk about.
Well, I got a blister on a long walk up to the Sour River, actually. And I would have probably gone to the medics, except I'd gone to the medics before when I had my stomach trouble, and they just laughed at me more or less. So I figured, well, I can't, no use in going with blisters. Made a mistake. My feet were already beginning to get a little numb from the cold. But after about a week, my blisters had gotten so bad that if I warmed my feet up, I couldn't walk. In fact, a few days after we got across the river, we attacked a little town of Biesdorf, Germany. Boy, that was a savage fight that I don't have time to talk about. But after we had just about cleaned that town up, I put on some warm socks, and my feet were so terrible that I went down to the company aid station. And I went in there, and the guy said, "What do you want?" And I told him, he said, "Get the H out of here. We got dying men in here." So I went on for 2 more weeks and lost another foxhole in the process. Incidentally, that day that I was talking about, that I just finished talking about, when my second foxhole buddy was killed.
Yes, sir.
on that, fighting our way down that ridge.
Right.
So that was my second foxhole buddy. I didn't find out about it. In the woods, we'd gotten separated. Besides, the lieutenant had run me down the hill, and that's when I got separated from the foxhole buddy. And so I didn't know until after the battle, really, that he had been killed.
Indeed.
But anyway, I went on, and towards the end, every time I took a step, blood and pus were literally squashing in my shoes. I think I told you about what finally did me in when we'd fought all the way through the Siegfried line, and they gave us a bath.
Mm-hmm.
Hadn't had them clothes off for nearly 2 months. Filthy dirty, of course. And what they did is they had this tent with a shower in it. You took off all your clothes and threw it in a pile, huge pile of clothes. You went in there and you got 5 minutes of water and soap. When the 5 minutes were over, you walked out, you dried yourself, and there was another huge pile of clean clothes, probably from the guys that had been bathed the day before.
Mm-hmm.
When I got dressed and tried to put my shoes on, it was agony, because now I'd had that warm water, and boy, hotty. And those blisters were awful. I had red infection lines running all the way to my knees, and around the blisters they were about that big and bleeding, and they were black about that big around them. So the next day, I hobbled down to battalion aid station, and I kind of convinced him that I had to fix those feet before I fought anymore. So he put a bandage on me and sent me back to division aid, and that doctor saw my feet and said, "You've got trench foot," and I went back to England. I think I told you the story about how when I got down there was a guy from Beaumont, Texas, and I got to talking about him, told him I had a brother in the medics, told him what unit my brother was in, and he said, "They're only a mile up the road here."
Mm-hmm.
And he got the chaplain, and the chaplain asked me how long it had been since I'd seen him. I told him 2 years. He went and got my brother, and he brought him back, and we visited all night long until I was flown out the next day to England. That was the end of war with me. Of course, I've skipped an awful lot of fighting here, but I know we don't have that much time, and we have to talk about Keel Hall.
Let's do that now.
Yeah.
Operation Keel Hall, without me going a lot into it, because I'll be honest, I had not been familiar with this until you told me about it the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I got on the internet and educated myself more about Operation Keel Hall, which was referred to in what I read as forced repatriation.
That's what it was.
You participated
I sure did.
in Operation Keel Hall.
I did indeed.
Something that you're not necessarily proud of, but you were a young man following
At the
orders.
time, I didn't give a hang, but it's
Right.
been bothering my conscience ever since. Right.
Tell people what Operation Keel Hall was.
If you were a Russian and Stalin was killing your people, where could you flee? You got to remember that Stalin killed more Ukrainians than Hitler did Jews, at least as many, and some say more. And so he killed about 1/4 of all Ukrainians. And Ukrainians by the millions had fled, but where can you go but Germany? It doesn't make you a Nazi any more than a Jew fleeing Germany and taking refuge in Russia is a communist.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those are illegitimate assumptions. So Germany was full of Russian refugees. Now it is true that some Russians were fighting in the German army too, just because they hated Stalin so much.
Right.
But most of these people that I'm talking about were just civilians.
Women and children.
too.
Right.
Oh yeah. Anyway, we were called out one Sunday morning, given ammunition, and the captain got up and explained that these Russians had taken refuge in a church. And they said they were going to die there rather than go back to Russia and die. But we have orders from the top that we are going to take them and put them on trucks and ship them out of there. And we're going to do it even if we have to kill them.
Ship them back to Russia.
We were going to kill them if we had to, but they were going to go back. So down we go to the church, and they had taken refuge inside. It was a fence around it, and they put me and another soldier on the guard at the gate. There were 2 or 3 gates, and they put 2 soldiers on each gate. The rest of the guys went inside. A battle royal broke out with rifle butts. They were fighting. In fact, the Orthodox priest in there was swinging his cross, it turned out. But he got a rifle butt in his face. Some poor woman had a heart attack. They finally drove them all out of the church. A couple of them made a break for it. 2 of them were shot. In fact, one of them, a whole group started around the corner, running right towards me and the other soldier that was with me. And when they got about, I'd say 15 feet, 20 feet away, there was a shot rang from the courtyard, and about a 16-year-old boy crumpled to the ground right in front of my face. My buddy and I threw our rifles up, and I hate to say it, but I was about to fire point blank into those people when they stopped. Now, this is the line that got my letter published in the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal in 1983 published an editorial about Operation Keel Haul that had been kept secret by the government because it was a disgrace that they wanted to cover up. And finally, they'd gotten the information through the Freedom of Information Act, and the Wall Street Journal wrote this editorial. I wrote this letter, and they published it, and I got an enormous response. But the title of the letter was, that the Wall Street Journal put on, was it, I thought Americans were good. When these poor Russian refugees stopped, no farther than from you to me, and I was sitting there with my gun pointing at them, a little Russian lady, I would guess 50, 55 years old, with tears running down her face, looked at me and said, I thought Americans were good. And I just yelled at her to shut up, and we drove them into the center of the courtyard and by force loaded them on the trucks. After it was over, we all marched away. Everybody was having just like we'd had an outing or a picnic, and nobody ever said anything like we'd done anything wrong. And the truth of it is we'd done exactly what the Germans did when they loaded Jews on the boxcars and sent them to the death camps, because Stalin probably killed most of those people. Fortunately, a lot of them got away on purpose.
And you were glad about that?
I was very glad when I learned it. One of the mistakes they made is we were combat soldiers. We were hard as nails. I mean, you haven't heard half of the stories of what I went through, for instance. And human life got cheap. They shouldn't use combat soldiers for police work. I got a fascinating letter from a KP, an MP, excuse me, an MP who was in charge of a camp where a lot of these people were. And he told how he had stalled and stonewalled for a couple of months until finally, and the Russians would come and demand him, and he would have some excuse, and they'd come again a week later, he'd have another excuse, and he never sent his people back. But you know, that was a military policeman. He had a better feel for it. We were just, see, we had been told, we were told by the captain that Stalin had told Roosevelt. Roosevelt, see, had agreed to this at Yalta, had told Roosevelt that they wouldn't be harmed. And when he said that, a laugh ran through the whole unit. We knew better than that. We knew better than that in 1945. We were a bunch of kids and we knew better than that. How could Roosevelt not have known? How could Truman not have known? How could Eisenhower not have known? 3 presidents of the United States were executing that. Roosevelt had agreed to it. Truman was president when it happened, and Eisenhower was supreme commander in the European theater and had to order it done.
Were the Brits involved too?
Oh yeah,
Churchill was in. They
were. Churchill agreed to it too. Oh yeah, oh yeah. You know what I really think? I think the attitude, World War II, people who talk about today just don't understand war. World War II was so bloody that I don't think anybody really cared what Stalin did to his people. If Stalin wants to kill his people, that's his concern. See, one of the excuses given, I told you this, one of the excuses given for why we carried it out was the fact that the Germans had put most of the American and British prisoners of war in camps in Poland. Mm-hmm. So if they escaped, they'd have to go so very, very far to get out. As a result, they were liberated by the Russians. And so the story goes is that we were fearful that if we did not at least go through the motion of returning these Russian refugees, they wouldn't return our prisoners of war. I don't think such an agreement was ever made, such a threat was ever made, and I don't think that, as a matter of fact, I think they did return, certainly most of our prisoners of war. I've heard a few stories about some that supposedly did not get back, but for the most part they did. And so it was never put to the test, really. But you can see that they would have been concerned about that. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing that excuses that, because we knew what was going to happen to those people.
It's an amazing story, and,
mm-hmm.
and if people want to hear more about the story, you can do what I did. You can go to any search engine on the internet
mm-hmm.
and type in Operation Keel Haul, K-E-E-L-H-A-U-L, and hear more about it. And I know that you personally have battled with guilt since then.
Oh yeah, I used to tell people I served in the American Gestapo. Mm-hmm. I haven't done that in a long time, but back in, say, about in the 50s, I'd tell people that I served in the American Gestapo.
I want to move on because we've only got a couple of minutes left. Dick Davison is our guest. You and your wife Joy will celebrate your 55th wedding anniversary
on July 7th.
Coming up. As people are seeing this, it's already happened. So congratulations! You all have 2 daughters and a son that I know you're very proud
mm-hmm.
of. Dick, you're fighting another battle.
Yes.
right now that you just found out about just recently.
Yeah, about
and
3 months ago.
You've agreed to talk about it, and talk about it in terms of tell them what your battle is, but your amazing attitude
Well,
in the
I'll
face
let you
of it.
speak of that, but you know.
Well, it
but-
is, and people can tell. Go
Well,
ahead.
you know, it's given unto man once to die, and after that's the judgment, and I am 80 years old. So one simply has to be philosophical about it. We do believe in a life hereafter, and I would go there if I didn't go there for I have lung cancer, by the way, and very likely it's terminal. Only by the grace of God it won't be. Hopefully I'll last a few years. That's possible. But fundamentally, I'm going to, at least when I feel good, I'm getting chemo, so there are days when I don't feel too good. But when I feel good, I'm simply going to live my life and simply be useful. I like to be useful. I feel, in fact, I get more pleasure out of being useful sometimes than I do out of having fun, you know. And so that's my attitude, Tom. And like I say, maybe I'm still feeling relatively good, and I'll admit that that when I do feel sick, things do get a little bit blacker. I'm having a pretty good day today, so.
Indeed you are, and we can only hope that you're blessed with many, many, many more good days. And thank you for your service, Dick Davison. We're out of time, but thank you for your service, and truly an incredible story of service.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you,
I've
sir.
enjoyed it very much.
After Dr. Dick Davison served his country in World War II, he continued to serve as a professor of engineering at Texas A&M for 45 years. He and his wife, Joy, have been married for 55 years, and as you've heard, that same courage that he needed more than 60 years ago serves him today in a different kind of battle. He has shared his story, and that's our honor to have heard it. We salute Dr. Dick Davison for his service, as we salute all veterans. I'm Tom Turbeville. Please join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.